Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping straight into a really pivotal moment in global politics. Those recent high-level talks between China and the U.S. in Tianjin.
That's right. And we're merely looking at this through the lens of a Chinese YouTube program, using their transcript and expert analysis.
Yeah, exactly. So what made this meeting so significant, especially, after the Anchorage talks earlier? And what does the Chinese take reveal about where things stand now? That's kind of our mission today.
Indeed. The Tianjin talks, they really give us a fascinating window into what might be a pretty big shift in China's diplomatic language. Their whole approach, really.
A shift? How so?
Well, the analysis suggests we're seeing like a new level of directness, a very clear, maybe even blunt laying out of their positions. Our goal is to unpack what that really means for everyone involved.
Okay, let's get right into that shift in tone then. The analysis we're looking at calls the Tianjin talks a, quote, face-to-face verbal confrontation.
Strong words.
Yeah, and even a new benchmark for China's pragmatic diplomacy.
Yeah.
What really jumped out at me was the sense of, well, Chinese confidence and a much more proactive stance than maybe we've seen before. It felt different.
That's a really key observation.
Mm-hmm.
The transcript talks about what it calls a comprehensive, thorough, and strong Chinese discourse.
Right.
And it's not seen as just a one-off thing. It's presented more as a deliberate response to what they feel is this ongoing Western discourse siege against China.
Discourse siege, that really is a strong term. Can you elaborate a bit? What does that actually mean from their point of view?
Sure. The analysts probably mean things like, critical media reports in the West about Xinjiang or Hong Kong, statements from Western politicians questioning their system, maybe discussions in international bodies that feel like they're targeting China unfairly. They see it as a kind of concerted effort.
Okay, an effort to undermine their narrative, their standing.
Exactly. To undermine their narrative.
That makes sense. And there was this historical echo mentioned too, wasn't there? Something about Mao Zedong.
Yes, referring to Mao's idea of using the language invaders understand.
Right. So the analysts see a parallel between military strategy and this verbal back and forth. What's the thinking there?
Precisely. The idea is, just like you'd meet a physical attack with a proportional response, you counter what you see as strong or critical language with equally direct unambiguous language yourself.
Okay.
And that really sets the stage for understanding the specific demands and the pushback that happened in Tianjin.
Which brings us neatly to these bottom lines China laid out. Foreign Minister Wang Yi reportedly gave 3 very clear red lines to Deputy Secretary Sherman. Can you walk us through those?
Absolutely. The first one, it's non-negotiable. The U.S. must not challenge, discredit, or, try to subvert China's socialist path and its political system.
Wow, okay. Straight to the core ideological differences.
Exactly. It's a firm insistence on the legitimacy of their system. And that could definitely make cooperation harder on issues that touch on that system.
A very firm stance indeed. And the second bottom line?
The second is just as resolute, basically. The U.S. must stop trying to obstruct or interrupt China's development.
So economic stuff.
Yes,
yeah.
Very much so. It includes demanding the lifting of unilateral sanctions, those hot tariffs, what they call long-arm jurisdiction, U.S. law reaching outside its borders, and efforts to suppress their technology.
Right. So they're tying economic and tech issues directly to the whole relationship.
Absolutely. It shows how central those things are to their overall strategy.
Okay, that's 2. Given the trade wars and tech disputes, that one carries a lot of weight. What was the final one?
The third red line is all about national sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Okay.
So no infringing on sovereignty, no undermining territorial integrity. This is, of course, super sensitive regarding Taiwan, the South China Sea.
Yeah.
Signaling these are absolutely core, non-negotiable interests for Beijing.
Very firm demands, definitely suggesting a shift in how they're firming things. Now, the talks also hit on human rights, which is always contentious. How did China respond when the U.S. raised concerns there?
Well, Vice Foreign Minister Xi Feng didn't just defend. He went on the counterattack, basically.
Oh, really? Huh?
He brought up U.S. human rights issues from, 3 angles: historical, present, and global.
Okay.
Historically, he mentioned the genocide of indigenous peoples in the U.S.
Right.
Presently, he pointed to the huge number of COVID-19 deaths in the U.S. as a failure to protect life. And globally, he talked about wars started by the U.S. based on, in China's view, lies causing immense suffering elsewhere.
Wow, that's turning the tables quite dramatically.
Exactly. And then he directly questioned the U.S.'s right to act as this global spokesperson for democracy and human rights, challenging their moral authority, given their own record as China sees it.
So not just defending, but actively questioning the U.S. position.
Precisely. It was an offensive move, not just defensive.
It really feels like that. Now, the transcript also digs into China's view on the U.S.'s stated three-part approach, competition, cooperation, confrontation. What was their take on that framework?
Xi Feng basically picked it apart. He argued it's just a tactic.
A tactic for what?
Primarily to contain and ultimately suppress China.
Okay.
The Chinese view, as laid out in this analysis, is that confrontation and containment. That's the real core of the U.S. strategy.
Cooperation.
Cooperation is just seen as, well, convenient for the U.S., something they use only when they need China's help.
I see. And competition.
Competition is viewed mostly as a rhetorical trap.
A trap? How so?
Well, the analysis suggests the U.S. wants cooperation only when it serves U.S. interests, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they're happy to decouple or impose sanctions where they think they have an edge. And they'll stir up conflict in areas they think will help contain China.
So the criticism is that it's all about unilateral benefit for the U.S.
That's the gist. That the U.S. wants the benefits without taking responsibility for the negative fallout, especially for China.
It sounds like, from their perspective, a very self-serving approach, which leads us to that phrase, talking from a position of strength. U.S. officials use that a lot. How did China react to that?
They flatly rejected it. Foreign Minister Wang Yi reportedly said very clearly China would not accept that kind of condescending attitude.
Right.
And that the U.S. needs to learn to deal with other countries, including China, as equals.
That echoes what Yang Jiechi said in Anchorage, doesn't it?
Strongly.
Yeah.
It suggests a consistent hardening line on this point. Anchorage really does feel like it was a turning point in their public messaging.
Yeah, it seems so.
And the analysis connects this to maybe a cultural difference. It suggests the U.S., maybe the West generally, operates in a culture where, strength and dominance are seen as key to negotiating effectively.
Okay.
So from the Chinese perspective, they feel they have to show their own strength and resolve just to be taken seriously, to be treated as an equal.
And how does that contrast with, say, more traditional Chinese diplomacy?
Well, traditionally, there's often been more emphasis on things like humility, patience, maybe a more indirect style.
Right.
But the analysts in this program argue that now, with the U.S. being more assertive, maybe even aggressive, China feels a more direct, unambiguous approach is actually more effective, maybe even necessary.
To get their point across.
Yeah.
Now, the transcript also mentioned China taking action before the talks, these counter-sanctions. Tell us about that.
Yeah, just 3 days before the meeting in Tianjin, China slapped sanctions on several U.S. individuals and groups. Notably, former Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross was on that list.
And that was significant because...
Because it was apparently the first time the U.S. faced pre-negotiation sanctions from China.
Definitely sends a message. A deliberate signal.
Yeah.
How did the U.S. react?
Well, the White House spokesperson, Jen Psaki, said publicly the U.S. wouldn't be intimidated.
Okay.
Now, the transcript notes, maybe a bit pointedly, that other countries have said they wouldn't be intimidated by the U.S. in the past, suggesting maybe a subtle shift in perceived power.
Interesting framing.
And at the same time, the People's Daily newspaper ran a strong editorial warning the U.S. not to use Taiwan and Hong Kong as, like, bargaining chips.
It really sounds like China was trying to set the terms of engagement before they even sat down. And speaking of setting terms, what about these homework lists presented to the U.S.?
Yes, the analysis says 2 lists were given to the U.S. side.
Okay.
The first has 16 specific demands, things China wants the U.S. to fix in its policies.
Like what? Any examples?
Reportedly, things like unconditionally lifting visa restrictions on CCP members and their families.
Wow.
And dropping the extradition request for Meng Wanzhou, the Huawei CFO.
Those are definitely major specific demands. What was on the second list?
The second list focused on 10 key individual cases of concern to China.
Cases involving?
Things like Chinese students being denied visas to study in the U.S. or alleged unfair treatment of Chinese citizens in the American legal system. And the analysts really emphasize this as kind of role reversal.
Yeah.
China handing the U.S. a list of demands, which is something the U.S. has historically done more often to others.
It really does highlight that perceived shift in the dynamic. Now, the transcript also touched on why the U.S. might be approaching things this way. What's the Chinese perspective on U.S. motivations in Tianjin?
The view presented in the analysis is basically that the U.S. even though it's facing big domestic problems like inflation,
Right.
still wants to assert global dominance. So it keeps using what China sees as these extreme pressure tactics.
And they cited specific examples of these provocative actions, right?
Yes, quite a few. Things like continued arms sales to Taiwan, U.S. military planes landing there, legislation on Xinjiang supply chains, sanctions and business warnings about Hong Kong, naval patrols in the South China Sea, the COVID origin investigation.
Okay, whole list.
Yeah. The main point from China's side seems to be this contradiction. The U.S. acting confrontationally even while appearing to need China's help on other big issues.
That contradiction does seem central to their frustration. The transcript then compared the economic situations in China and the U.S. What was the key takeaway there?
It contrasted China's relative perceived calm and stability with what they see as chaos and uncertainty in the U.S., especially inflation and maybe future financial risks.
And they blamed specific U.S. policies.
Yeah, two main things were highlighted as alleged mistakes. The huge money printing after the 2008 crisis, and starting the trade war with China, where they argue U.S. companies and consumers ended up paying the price.
So what's the implication for the future? Will China help if the U.S. faces more economic trouble?
The message was very firm. China refuses to be the burden taker for what it sees as bad U.S. economic policy.
Right.
The analysts mentioned their own earlier predictions that the U.S. would lose the trade war, citing, self-inflicted damage, leadership issues, and China's resolve. They even used an analogy to Mao Zedong's ideas on protracted conflict, suggesting they see this as a long game.
It sounds like they feel they're in a much stronger, more resilient economic spot right now compared to the U.S. The discussion also briefly mentioned ideology and the global order. What were the points there?
They referenced a talk apparently given at Yale back in 2018, where the speaker argued it was China's socialist system, not just state capitalism, that helped the U.S. during the 2008 crisis, emphasizing Chinese values like cooperation.
Interesting perspective.
And then the analysis repeated a prediction of a possible future U.S. financial crisis.
Right.
And stated China's determination not to offer major help again unless the U.S. fundamentally changes its approach to the relationship.
So cooperation requires equality and mutual respect, not unilateral dominance.
That's the core message. A shared future needs genuine cooperation, not one power calling all the shots.
That theme of mutual respect keeps coming up. Now, the transcript included commentary from an expert, Juan Renwei, specifically on Tianjin. What were his main points?
Huang provided some useful background. He noted that, early hopes for much better U.S.-China relations under Biden didn't really pan out.
Right. Things stayed tense.
Yeah. While some Trump policies were changed, a lot of the tougher stuff remained. He then listed the high-level contacts before Tianjin, the Xi-Biden call, Yang-Blinken talks, Anchorage calls between economic teams.
Setting the scene.
Exactly. And Wang really highlighted Yang Jiechi's statement in Anchorage, no qualification to speak from a position of strength, as a key moment. A watershed, he called it.
He really saw Anchorage as pivotal then.
Absolutely. Huang argued that even after that, let's call it ton lashing in Anchorage, the U.S. still came to Tianjin with that talking from strength attitude.
But he saw weaknesses behind that.
Yes. He pointed to things like strained U.S. relationships with allies and major domestic economic issues, inflation, national debt, maybe a stock market bubble. He kind of speculated the U.S. might have secretly hoped China would offer some economic help, but was maybe too proud or hesitant to ask directly.
Interesting. And how did China respond to this perceived U.S. attitude in Tianjin, according to Huang?
Well, Huang described China's first move as sending the lower-level official, Xi Feng, to meet Sherman.
Okay.
Then Wang Yi came in and delivered the, quote, lesson, laying out those three bottom lines very clearly.
Right.
Huang also noted how U.S. media focused a lot on Wang Yi, suggesting they recognized his higher status and the weight of his message.
So the overall Chinese view, according to Huang, was that the U.S. came expecting China to listen and maybe help out, while the U.S. stayed dominant.
That's the picture Huang painted, yes.
Yeah.
Very different expectations on each side.
Definitely seems that way. What about U.S. actions right after Tianjin? Did anything change?
According to the transcript, not really. The U.S. continued with actions China saw as confrontational.
Such as?
Renewed accusations about cyber attacks, Secretary Blinken engaging with India, Secretary Austin visiting Southeast Asia, large U.S. military drills in the region.
So business as usual, basically.
Pretty much, from the Chinese perspective. Specific examples mentioned were things like banning Taiwanese maps in Hong Kong, Biden's Hong Kong memorandum, talk of delisting Chinese companies, calls for U.S. money to leave Hong Kong.
So the tone in Tianjin didn't seem to lead to immediate changes in U.S. actions. How did China react to that?
The analysis described a sort of dual response.
Okay.
First, they appointed Qin Gang as the new ambassador to the U.S., and he's apparently been quite active in PR, stressing that U.S.-China engagement is irreversible, talking dialogue.
Trying to keep channels open.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But second, China also seemed to ramp up its counter-narrative on COVID-19 origins, focusing more attention on Fort Detrick in the U.S.
So maintaining communication while also pushing back hard on specific issues. Given all this, what's the overall feeling in the analysis about improving relations anytime soon?
It sounds pretty difficult, frankly. The core analysis is that the U.S. approach wanting advantages while trying to suppress China is understood by Beijing, and they just won't play along. The transcript again mentioned Mao's view of the U.S. as often arrogant and unreasonable. And the fact that U.S. pressure tactics continued after Tianjin just reinforces a kind of pessimistic outlook in the commentary.
The transcript also brought up Tianjin's history, that unequal treaty. Why was that mentioned?
Yeah, they drew a direct parallel to the unequal treaty signed there in 1858.
A stark contrast to today.
Absolutely. Back then, China was weak, forced to accept terms. Now, China's the one laying down bottom lines and making demands. It really underscores the huge shift in national strength and global standing.
A way to highlight how much things have changed.
Exactly. It allows them to, give lessons now, present their own concerns. Though the analysis did clarify the choice of Tianjin wasn't necessarily meant just to humiliate the U.S.
Okay.
But the contrast with how the Chinese felt they were treated in Anchorage is certainly there.
It's a powerful historical backdrop. Let's dig a bit more into this shift in China's diplomatic style. It feels harder, more assertive. What's driving that?
It's explicitly linked in the analysis to Xi Jinping's concept of pingxi,
which means
looking at the world as equals, or an equal gaze.
Okay.
It means a more objective, confident assessment of everyone's strengths and weaknesses, including their own, and including the U.S.'s. The idea is to be less easily misled or intimidated.
And Anchorage was the start of this publicly?
That's how the analysis frames it, yes.
Yeah.
The start of this new, more assertive model.
Yeah.
And the commentary suggests it's likely here to stay, especially if the U.S. maintains what China sees as an arrogant stance.
So a deliberate strategic shift. How does this connect to that idea of a new type of great power relations?
It connects directly. That concept's core ideas are, non-conflict, non-confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation.
Right.
And the analysis stresses that mutual respect isn't just one part. It's the foundation, the absolute prerequisite for this new relationship.
And the U.S. has been reluctant to accept that.
Historically, yes, according to this view. Reluctant to really see China as an equal great power, especially given the different political systems. But the point is made that China isn't aiming to dominate the U.S. The goal is just to ensure its own core interests are respected by everyone. So mutual respect is key to both the equal gaze approach and this new proposed relationship framework.
It really sounds like the ball is in the U.S. court, according to this analysis. It ends by stressing the need for U.S. self-reflection. What needs to change on the American side?
The bottom line in the transcript is that real improvement depends on the U.S. overcoming its own internal issues and, shedding what are called outdated mindsets, exceptionalism, wanting dominance.
A fundamental shift in thinking.
Yes. They even use the term 解释逆反, like an ideological emancipation for the U.S.
Wow.
The analysis also suggests there's a lack of real strategic thinkers influencing U.S. policy right now, a disconnect between analysis and politics. And there's a warning that the U.S. might take desperate actions if it keeps going down, what China sees as a narrow confrontational path.
And China's bottom lines aren't meant as a threat.
The argument is no, they're just about protecting legitimate interests. But they're perceived as a threat by the U.S. because of its, quote, hegemonic mindset. The influence of extreme right-wing and deep state forces in the U.S. is also mentioned as a complicating factor.
That's a pretty stark assessment of the challenges. Now, we did get a couple of really good questions from listeners. First one from a student in Australia. Did the U.S. ask for the Tianjin talks because they actually needed China's help? What's the expert take based on this analysis?
Well, that's definitely a widespread view, and the Chinese analysis we've looked at certainly leans into that idea.
That the U.S. is facing challenges where China's help would be useful.
Exactly. The Biden administration has a lot on its plate, right?
Yeah.
Economic recovery, climate change, social divisions, and China's role in global supply chains, climate talks, its economic weight cooperation is arguably needed on many fronts. It reflects maybe a shifting power balance.
And the U.S. economy specifically. Inflation, debt.
Yes, the analysis highlights those domestic pressures. It suggests the U.S. might implicitly hope China will act as that, well, maybe buying U.S. debt or helping with trade imbalances.
But China's saying no deal without changes.
Pretty much. The message is firm. No playing that role without fundamental shifts in the relationship, without preconditions. Large-scale cooperation needs a positive atmosphere of mutual respect.
Right.
Plus, you have the importance of the Chinese market for U.S. companies, China's financial power. It creates this structural contradiction, the U.S. needing help from its biggest perceived rival.
Interesting. Some analysts even suggested releasing Meng Wanzhou could be a signal.
That kind of gesture was mentioned as something that could potentially create a better atmosphere, yes. The idea is that the U.S.'s underlying needs, not just its rhetoric, show its actual situation.
And U.S. businesses want the trade war to end.
Many do, yes. And the potential harm of the tech war to U.S. companies themselves also points towards needing a rethink. The analysis basically critiques the U.S. for using extreme pressure tactics against the wrong target, arguing China is resilient and strategically savvy. Maybe, they suggest, the U.S. lacks understanding of China's perspective.
A very comprehensive answer there. Okay, second question. About choosing Tianjin. Was it a deliberate psychological move, given the unequal treaty history there?
It's a fascinating thought. And while the Chinese side hasn't explicitly said so, you could definitely read it as subtle signaling.
The historical contrast is pretty dramatic.
Undeniably. China weak then. China strong now, asserting its bottom lines. But the analysis we reviewed suggests the main reason might not have been specifically to evoke that history to, shame the U.S.
Okay, so maybe more practical reasons.
Possibly. It's noted China hold big diplomatic events in various cities now, not just Beijing, to promote engagement across the country. And compared to Anchorage, Tianjin might have offered a more, let's say, formal and accommodating setting.
So the historical resonance is there, but maybe not the primary driver.
That seems to be the assessment, yeah. Acknowledge the history,
Sure.
but don't overstate the intentionality, perhaps.
A balanced view. Okay, final listener question. About this shift in China's diplomatic style we've discussed, is this more assertive approach likely to stick around?
The short answer, based on this analysis, is yes, very likely.
Because it's rooted in that equal gaze idea.
Exactly. That idea of engaging based on mutual respect and a clear-eyed view of strengths and weaknesses. The expectation is China will keep communicating directly, unambiguously, focusing on core interests.
Using language they think the U.S. understands.
Right, which
Yeah.
often means being very explicit about red lines. The analysis suggests that if the U.S. stays, in China's view, arrogant or dismissive, China will continue delivering these firm lessons.
And the goal is still that new type of great power relations.
Yes, founded on mutual respect. That's seen as the absolute prerequisite for stable cooperation and avoiding conflict. It's about China asserting its legitimate rights and interests.
Yeah.
And the analysis suggests that even as China grows stronger, this principle of mutual respect, unlike what they see as past U.S. hegemony, will remain central to their foreign policy.
Right. So wrapping up our deep dive on Tianjin, it really seems this meeting marked a significant shift in China's diplomacy.
Yeah, more confident, more direct, laying out those very firm bottom lines.
It truly highlights the complex, evolving U.S.-China dynamic. China is clearly asserting itself more, challenging the traditional U.S. approach.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Given this assertive new posture from China and their analysis of U.S. internal challenges and strategic errors, what fundamental changes might the U.S. actually need to make to build a more stable, productive, long-term relationship?
And maybe even more fundamentally, is the U.S. political system even capable of making that kind of profound shift right now?
Some really crucial questions to keep thinking about.
Definitely. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. For more analysis like this, please do check out our website and other platforms.